The red frontier when the first explorers looked up at the crimson dot in the night sky. Mars was nothing more than a mystery, a silent wanderer, forever distant. For centuries, poets, astronomers, and dreamers alike asked the same question. Could it one day be a new home for humanity? The dream persisted even as the evidence grew clear. Mars was no Earth. Its sky was thin and hostile, its ground frozen, its air choking. Yet humans, with their relentless curiosity, could never let go of the thought that perhaps, with enough will, enough science, and enough sacrifice, life might flourish on that barren world. The environment of Mars does not welcome fragile flesh and breath. Its atmosphere, less than 1% the pressure of Earth's, is almost entirely carbon dioxide. To step outside without a protective suit would be instant death, not because of lack of air alone, but because one's blood would boil in the near vacuum. The lungs would gasp, but nothing nourishing would come. The sky above, unshielded by a thick blanket of nitrogen and oxygen, allows radiation to pour down, a constant invisible rain of cosmic particles. Even the sunlight, weaker and colder, struggles to warm the rusty plains. And yet, in these conditions lies the canvas of one of humanity's greatest ambitions. Scientists know that Mars does not offer oxygen the way Earth does. The balance of gases is wrong. 95% carbon dioxide, 3% nitrogen, and only traces of oxygen far too thin to matter. If humans are to breathe there, they must create oxygen from the world itself, from the rock, the soil, or the carbon dioxide that surrounds them. In fact, technology like MOXIE, an instrument sent aboard NASA's Perseverance rover, has already proven that it is possible. By splitting carbon dioxide, it can release oxygen molecules. It is only a trickle for now, but a promise, a proof of concept that future machines might churn the thin air into something humans can inhale. But oxygen alone is not enough. Pressure matters. Mars surface pressure averages only about 600 pascals, compared to Earth's 101,000. At that pressure, liquid water cannot exist. It either freezes solid or boils away instantly. And water is the heart of life. Without water, no crops can grow, no cells can endure, no colonists can live. Thankfully, Mars hides water in its frozen regolith and in the shadows of its poles. Vast glaciers lie beneath the dust, relics of ancient rivers and seas that once carved valleys and deltas billions of years ago. To tap into this water, settlers would need drills, reactors, and patience. Each molecule precious, each drop guarded like treasure. The first settlers imagined in this tale are scientists, engineers, and dreamers, landing in a storm of dust at the edge of Jezero crater. Their domes, inflated with Earth-made polymers, stand against the desolation. Within them, life persists. Crops grow under artificial light. Recycled water circulates through hydroponic tubes. The settlers breathe air not from Mars, but from machines that work tirelessly, compressing, filtering, and manufacturing. They are pioneers of survival. Their every day a test of whether Mars can tolerate human stubbornness. Yet the question persists, whispered in the quiet of long Martian nights. Can this place ever truly be called home? A home is not just a shelter. It is a world where children can run without helmets, where rivers can sing, where the air itself embraces you. For Mars to become such a place, the challenge is greater than survival. It is transformation. Terraforming is the word often spoken in bold proposals. Could Mars be remade into a second Earth? Could its frozen carbon dioxide at the poles be released to thicken the air, creating pressure enough for water to flow? Could greenhouses seeded with Earth's plants exhale oxygen and shift the balance of gases over centuries? Could orbiting mirrors warm the surface, raising temperatures just enough to coax Mars into life? These are dreams on the scale of civilizations, not missions. They demand patience measured not in decades, but in millennia. Still, humans begin with smaller steps. Inside the domes, experiments unfold. Potatoes sprout in Martian regolith mixed with compost. Cyanobacteria bubble in tanks, turning carbon dioxide into oxygen. Algae, that humble ancestor of forests, thrive in carefully tuned vats. These are not just science projects. They are blueprints of a future where biology partners with machinery to give Mars breath. The settlers know that radiation is their silent enemy. Unlike Earth, Mars has no global magnetic field to shield its surface. Cosmic rays and solar storms strike freely. The domes, fragile against such onslaughts, are reinforced by layers of regolith piled on top. Underground habitats are dug into cliffs and lava tubes, where stone offers protection. Children born here, should they come one day, would inherit bones and muscles shaped by lower gravity, radiation-resistant genes perhaps edited before birth, and minds molded by a sky that is forever red. But even with these defenses, the psychological burden is heavy. Mars offers no oceans, no forests, no songs of birds. Its silence is profound, and humans are creatures of sound and beauty. To live here, they bring with them recordings of Earth, waves crashing, wind in the trees, the laughter of cities. Artificial reality creates simulated horizons, digital birds in holographic skies. Still, they know the truth. Beyond the walls is a world indifferent to their existence. Yet is Earth not also indifferent? Earth once was a violent place, unfit for life, until life itself transformed it. Bacteria filled the sky with oxygen. Plants clothed the land. Life reshaped its own cradle. Perhaps Mars awaits the same destiny, not as Earth once was, but as Earth once became. NASA's images, sweeping plains of dust, lonely mountains like Olympus Mons, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, are not just landscapes. They are invitations. Every rover's photo is a postcard from a future home. Every satellite map a survey of neighborhoods yet to be built. Mars is not impossible. It is merely patient. And so the story of humans on Mars begins not with conquest, but with coexistence. They cannot breathe its air yet, but they carry Earth's air with them. They cannot drink its rivers, but they melt its ice. They cannot walk freely on its surface, but they walk nonetheless, leaving footprints beside the tire tracks of rovers. Each step is both fragile and monumental, a reminder that survival here is proof of something greater, the refusal of humanity to accept limits. Mars asks, "Can you live here?" Humanity answers, "We will try." The settlers woke to mornings unlike any they had known on Earth. The sun rose not with the golden blaze familiar to them, but with a softer, weaker light filtered through thin air. It was a disk smaller, more fragile, yet still capable of stirring awe as it broke across the horizon, casting long shadows on rust-colored plains. Dust, so fine it clung to every surface, sparkled faintly in the dawn. The world outside was silent, but within the domes, the hum of machines sang the music of survival. Breathing here was never effortless. The air inside the habitat was a constant reminder of fragility. Oxygen was not abundant. It was carefully monitored, rationed in its own way. Every breath the settlers took was the product of machines working tirelessly. Electrolysis units splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. Moxie-like reactors pulling oxygen from carbon dioxide. Algae bioreactors bubbling with microscopic life that turned waste into breath. Humans had lived for millennia, taking air for granted. On Mars, air was a treasure. Children would one day be taught that oxygen was never free here. They would grow up with an understanding of chemistry as instinctive as Earth children understood weather. Instead of saying it's a windy day, they might say oxygen output was strong today. Language itself would adapt, molded by necessity, shaped by survival. Pressure remained another invisible master. The settlers' homes were not houses, but sealed shells. To step outside required armor, spacesuits engineered to hold Earth's pressure against Mars' emptiness. A mistake, even a small tear, could be fatal. Doors were airlocks, not thresholds. The settlers moved with caution, not out of fear, but with the practiced respect of mountaineers who knew one misstep could bring death. Water, too, defined their lives. They mined ice buried beneath the regolith, melting it with heaters powered by nuclear reactors and solar farms. Every liter was measured, purified, reused. A glass of water was not simply refreshment. It was a victory of engineering. Hydroponic farms lined with lettuce, potatoes, and beans drank carefully rationed supplies, while waste streams were filtered and cycled back into the system. To waste water was unthinkable. It was to waste life itself. But water was more than utility. It was memory. In the quiet of the dome, settlers often spoke of rain. Some had never loved the rain on Earth, but here, the absence of it haunted them. They imagined the sound of drops tapping on rooftops, rivers flowing freely, oceans swelling against shores. On Mars, such things were only dreams, but perhaps one day they could become more than dreams. Terraforming was still far away, but in the settlers' imaginations, it had already begun. They worked tirelessly to map where ice lay, where frozen reservoirs could be tapped, and where future colonies might be built. NASA images and orbital maps guided them, but first-hand exploration confirmed it. Mars was rich in ice, if only one dared to extract it. In this discovery, hope glowed brighter. Yet hope was always balanced by danger. Radiation remained the silent predator. Solar storms, invisible but lethal, could send waves of charged particles sweeping across Mars. The settlers had early warning systems tied to satellites orbiting overhead. When storms came, they retreated to underground shelters carved from regolith or into lava tubes that nature had hollowed eons ago. Within these caves, shielded from radiation, they felt a sense of protection. It was there that they dreamed of future cities built beneath the surface, safe from the hostile skies. In those caves, the settlers' imagination ran wild. They envisioned vast chambers filled with artificial sunlight, underground gardens where trees might grow, rivers flowing through carved stone valleys. Humanity, they realized, might not need to make Mars like Earth on the surface. They could shape it from within, building a second world hidden below, where pressure, warmth, and air were all controlled. Still, the surface called to them. To live only beneath was to accept exile. And so they experimented with shields, magnetic barriers, regolith bricks hardened into walls, even thoughts of enormous mirrors placed in orbit to bend sunlight downward. The settlers knew that their lives were temporary scaffolding for something greater. They were not only survivors, they were architects of a future civilization. Every evening, they looked at the sky and thought of Earth. The blue world hung as a star, sometimes bright, sometimes faint, always distant. Earth was home, yet no longer entirely so. Those who had chosen Mars had chosen a frontier, and in doing so, they redefined what it meant to belong. They were no longer children of Earth alone. They were pioneers of two worlds. Mars' gravity, just a third of Earth's, also shaped them. Their muscles adjusted, their bones shifted. Exercise was no longer a choice, but survival. Without constant training, their bodies weakened. Gyms and a habitat were as important as the farms. Over time, though, they noticed something strange. Moving on Mars became a dance, graceful in its own way. Jumps that would be clumsy on Earth became effortless here. Work was hard, but play was light. Children born here, they imagined, would leap higher than their parents ever could. And so the settlers began to feel Mars not just as a place they endured, but as a place they were learning to live with. Its harshness had not softened, but their resilience had grown. Life was no longer about surviving each day. It was about building toward tomorrow. They planted more crops, tested more bioreactors, and expanded their shelters. They built 3D printers that used Martian dust to create bricks, shelters, even tools. Step by step, they reduced dependence on Earth. Resupply ships still came, but with every year, they needed less. The settlers dreamed of the day when no resupply would be necessary at all, when Mars itself would sustain them. And perhaps, they thought, this was the true test. Humanity had always grown by adapting to challenges. On Earth, they had crossed oceans, braved deserts, endured winters, and survived plagues. Mars was simply the next challenge, writ larger than ever before. If they could endure here, then no frontier would be closed to them. Not the moons of Jupiter, not the icy reaches beyond, not even the stars. The settlers walked out into the red dust, their footprints marking the soil. Behind them, the domes glowed with light, fragile yet defiant. Above them, the sky blushed with twilight. Mars was no longer a distant dream. It was their world now, not conquered, not tamed, but shared. Night on Mars was deeper than any night the settlers had ever known. The thin atmosphere scattered little light, and when the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness fell quickly. Stars burned fiercely in the black sky, unblurred by clouds or haze. Earth itself often shone as a bright star, pale blue and hauntingly small, suspended among countless others. For the settlers, each glimpse of Earth was a reminder, not only of distance but of origin. Inside the domes, artificial day persisted. Lights hummed above the crops, corridors glowed faintly, and machines never slept. Energy flowed from solar panels spread across the plain and from compact nuclear reactors humming in silence. Every what was precious, carefully distributed, measured, and rationed. Heating alone devoured vast amounts, for the nights here plunged to extremes colder than Antarctica. Without energy, the domes would freeze within hours, pipes would crack, water would turn to ice, and air itself would grow too frigid to breathe. Thus, power was as sacred as oxygen and water. Engineers worked tirelessly to improve efficiency. They dreamt of fusion reactors, of orbiting solar arrays beaming power to the surface, of future systems that might one day make energy not a daily worry, but a dependable abundance. For now, though, every kilowatt hour mattered, and every spark was guarded. Yet even in this unforgiving environment, the settlers found moments of beauty. Through the transparent sections of the dome, they watched dust devils twist across the desert, tiny tornadoes of red dust spinning silently. They marveled at sunsets when the sky turned blue near the horizon, a reversal of Earth's colors. They took time to step outside, even if wrapped in layers of protection, to stand beneath Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, or to gaze into the yawning abyss of Valles Marineris, a canyon that stretched longer than any river on Earth. These sights reminded them of why they came, not only to survive, but to witness the grandeur of a new world. Still, the weight of isolation pressed heavily on their minds. Communication with Earth was never instant. Depending on orbital positions, signals took anywhere from 4 to 20 minutes to arrive. Conversations were never dialogues, but exchanges of recorded voices and texts. The settlers missed the immediacy of human connection. They missed casual laughter, the chaos of crowded cities, the feeling of being surrounded by life. On Mars, every voice was familiar, every face known. Privacy was rare, and monotony was constant. Psychologists on Earth had warned of this. They had designed protocols, daily schedules, social rituals, even artificial entertainment environments. Virtual reality became a bridge, transporting settlers into simulated forests, oceans, or streets bustling with digital crowds. Some embraced it, losing themselves in illusion, while others rejected it, preferring to face Mars as it truly was: silent, empty, real. Children, it was imagined, would handle this differently. They would not long for Earth in the same way. They would not remember its oceans or skies except through stories. For them, Mars would be normal, the only world they knew. But that day had not yet come. For now, the settlers were all immigrants, their roots still deep in Earth, their branches stretching into alien soil. The question of permanence loomed. Could humans truly stay here generation after generation? Or was this merely an experiment, a temporary outpost destined to fade? Biology itself posed challenges. Mars' low gravity might alter human development in unpredictable ways. Would children's bones grow weak? Would their hearts struggle? Would evolution itself take a new path here? Some scientists whispered of genetic modification, of adapting humanity at the cellular level to thrive in reduced gravity and higher radiation. Ethics blurred at the frontier. Survival often demanded choices Earth would hesitate to make. Meanwhile, terraforming remained a dream, distant but never forgotten. Studies suggested that even if every bit of carbon dioxide locked in Mars' poles and soil were released, the atmosphere would still be too thin. Mirrors, asteroids redirected to crash and release volatiles, microbes engineered to thrive in the cold. These were ideas on the edge of imagination. Yet every day, the settlers looked at the frozen desert and wondered, was this world waiting to be awakened, or was it destined to remain asleep? Philosophers among them asked, should Mars be changed at all? Perhaps it was wrong to remake another world in Earth's image. Perhaps Mars had a right to remain what it was: silent, ancient, untouched. Others argued that humanity's survival depended on such transformation. Earth was fragile, its climate uncertain, its resources strained. Mars, harsh as it was, offered continuity a second chance. And so debates echoed in the domes. At meals, Over recycled water and hydroponic vegetables, settlers argued about ethics, survival, and the meaning of colonization. Some believed they were guardians, keeping Mars as a museum of cosmic history. Others believed they were pioneers, destined to mold the planet into a new home. All agreed, however, that their very presence had already changed Mars forever. The settlers began rituals to anchor themselves. Weekly gatherings where stories of Earth were told, songs sung, and laughter forced itself past weariness. They celebrated Earth holidays, even if seasons no longer matched. They created new traditions too, a festival for the first water extracted, a day of silence on the anniversary of their arrival, a shared moment each evening when lights dimmed and they watched Earth and the sky together. It was in these small rituals that community grew. Mars was hostile, but within the domes, humanity endured. And as days turned into months and months into years, a new realization dawned. Perhaps they were not simply visitors anymore. Perhaps they were Martians in the making. The term itself carried weight. Martian once meant alien, a creature of fantasy. Now it meant human beings who had chosen to root themselves in another world. Slowly, identities shifted. They no longer thought of themselves only as exiles from Earth, but as founders of something new. Their children, when they came, would not be immigrants, they would be natives. Mars, indifferent and cold, had not softened, but humanity had bent, adapted, endured. And in that endurance, life had taken its first fragile steps beyond the cradle of Earth. As the years stretched onward, the settlers began to realize something profound. Mars was not simply a place they endured, it was shaping them. Each day, the red planet carved subtle marks on their bodies, their minds, and their culture. Their language began to evolve. Words like airlock, regolith, and soul. The Martian day slipped into everyday speech with ease. I'll meet you after 5 sols, someone might say, or check the regolith harvest numbers. Slowly, Earth's vocabulary merged with Mars' reality. Even humor adapted. Jokes about leaking oxygen tanks, teasing over who forgot to reset the carbon dioxide scrubbers, laughter about Martian tan lines, where helmets met collars. But beneath the lightheartedness lay truth. Life here was fragile. Every joke masked awareness. A crack in a dome, a failure in the water recycling system, or a solar flare arriving too soon could end everything. The settlement had grown since the first domes were inflated. What began as a handful of habitats expanded into clusters connected by tunnels. Each dome had a purpose: living quarters, farms, workshops, laboratories. Rovers carried explorers farther and farther from the safety of Jezero Crater, mapping resources, studying ancient riverbeds, and probing caves. The settlers discovered frozen layers of water, ice, just meters beneath the soil in some places, treasures waiting to be tapped. With water came more possibilities. Scientists began experimenting with more ambitious greenhouses. They tested soil enrichment, mixing Martian regolith with organic compost, breaking down toxic perchlorates, introducing Earth microbes engineered to tolerate harsh conditions. Bit by bit, Mars' lifeless dirt yielded to sprouts of green. Each new leaf was celebrated. Each harvest, though small, carried significance greater than its weight. Proof that life could take hold in alien soil. And yet, challenges remained relentless. Radiation sickness appeared in some settlers after years of exposure. Medical teams studied the effects, trying treatments, experimenting with protective compounds. Some called for permanent underground living, while others resisted, unwilling to abandon the sky, even if it was a thin, deadly veil. The debate split the colony, but solutions emerged. A hybrid lifestyle evolved: deep caves for storm shelters and long-term protection, surface domes for farming and daily life, shielded with regolith and innovative materials. Humanity adapted again, as it always had. The children of Mars became a reality sooner than anyone expected. The first birth was not planned. It came as a surprise, the natural result of people living together, sharing bonds, seeking comfort in isolation. When the child cried its first breath in the dome, a hush fell over the colony. That tiny cry carried more weight than any machine, any rover, any experiment. It was proof humanity was not just surviving on Mars, it was beginning to grow. The child thrived, though doctors monitored closely. Lower gravity shaped its development. Its muscles and bones grew differently than Earth-born children. Some whispered that Martian-born humans might one day diverge, becoming a new branch of humanity, adapted to their world. Others feared what that meant. Would Earth still claim them as kin, or would they become truly Martian? As the child grew, so too did the settlers' sense of permanence. They were no longer temporary visitors waiting for resupply ships. They were residents. They were builders. They were a community. Yet with permanence came responsibility. Terraforming debates grew louder. Some colonists argued that Mars should remain as it was, pristine, untouched, a planet preserved in its raw state. Others dreamed of oceans thawed, skies thickened, forests planted. The dreamers pointed to Earth's crises: climate change, overpopulation, fragile ecosystems. Mars, they said, could be humanity's safeguard, its second cradle. If they did not shape Mars, they risked extinction should Earth falter. Technology advanced. Orbital mirrors were tested, small at first, glinting like artificial stars above Mars, reflecting sunlight on its chosen regions. The goal was modest: warming patches of soil, helping greenhouses, testing the concept. But the results stirred excitement. For the first time, humanity had not only adapted to Mars, it had begun to alter it. Yet progress was never without cost. Resources were stretched, tempers flared. Disagreements over priorities led to fractures. Some settlers believed too much effort was spent on long-term dreams while short-term needs, like medical supplies, mental health, and infrastructure, were neglected. Others argued that only by aiming high could they endure. The colony held meetings, heated debates echoing in cramped halls, until compromises were struck. But the tension lingered. Through it all, Earth watched. Messages streamed in: news of politics, wars, triumphs, and tragedies. Sometimes settlers felt Earth was too far to matter. Other times, its pull was overwhelming, a reminder of oceans, forests, skies. Supplies still came, ships landing with fresh faces, new equipment, and materials impossible to make locally. But more and more, the settlers depended on themselves. The balance was shifting, and in quiet moments, standing under the stars, they asked themselves the question that had begun it all: can humans live on Mars? The answer was no longer theoretical. It was in the breath of a Martian child. It was in the leaves of crops grown in alien soil. It was in the laughter that filled the domes, echoing against plastic walls. Yes, humans could live on Mars. The question now was, what kind of life would they choose to create here? As decades passed, the colony on Mars ceased to be an experiment. It became a society. The early settlers, those who had come braced for hardship, grew old beneath domes of steel and glass. Their children, the first generation born on the Red Planet, grew into adults who knew no other sky but the thin, pale one above. The differences between Earth-born and Mars-born humans became more pronounced with each passing year. Martian-born children grew taller, their bones shaped by gravity only a third as strong as Earth's. Their muscles, though regularly exercised, never reached the density of their Earth-born parents. Medical research confirmed that they would struggle to live on Earth without long adaptation, if they could adapt at all. Radiation, too, left subtle marks, higher risks of mutations, cellular changes still being studied. And yet, despite these vulnerabilities, they thrived in their own way. They were agile, graceful, at home in the light leaps and soft strides of Mars. The Martian identity solidified. These children, now young adults, did not think of Earth as home. To them, Earth was a distant myth, a place of oceans and forests they had never seen, only imagined through images and stories. Their loyalty, their culture, their sense of belonging, these belonged to Mars. They called themselves Martians without hesitation, not as a symbol of alienness, but as an affirmation of origin. The culture of Mars reflected its environment. Efficiency and conservation were not just values, but necessities. Waste was taboo. Collaboration was instinctive. No one survived alone. Art itself was shaped by scarcity and imagination. Sculptures were carved from regolith bricks, paintings made with limited pigments, songs sung in the echo of domes. Storytelling became central, a way to pass down memories of Earth and to define the meaning of life on Mars. Governance evolved as well. At first, Earth agencies, NASA, ESA, private companies, maintained authority issuing instructions from across the void. But as the colony expanded, as new generations took root, governance shifted. Local councils emerged, formed of settlers themselves. They debated laws, managed resources, and made decisions independent of Earth. Tensions grew as Martians demanded more autonomy, arguing that those who lived the reality of Mars were better suited to govern it than distant bureaucrats. This gave rise to the first real conflict between Earth and Mars: ownership. Who controlled the resources of Mars? Were they the property of Earth, whose technology and funding had built the colony, or of the Martians, who lived and labored there? The Outer Space Treaty of the 20th century had forbidden nations from claiming celestial bodies, but legal words written centuries ago faltered under the weight of living reality. Mars was no longer a distant rock. It was inhabited, worked, and sustained by people. While political disputes simmered, science pressed forward. Martian researchers unlocked more secrets of their world. They mapped ancient riverbeds, studied sediments, and discovered evidence of organic molecules buried deep in the soil. Faint whispers that life might once have existed here. The possibility electrified humanity. Had Mars been alive billions of years ago? Did microbes still slumber beneath its frozen crust? Yet this discovery raised a dilemma. If Mars still harbored microbial life, however hidden, should humanity terraform it? To flood the planet with Earth organisms would mean extinction for any native species, no matter how small. Some colonists felt strongly humanity had no right to erase Martian life. Others countered. To keep Mars sterile for microbes was to deny humanity a chance at survival. Terraforming projects advanced cautiously. Engineers expanded orbital mirrors, warming select regions. Greenhouses multiplied, producing surplus crops. Small outdoor test zones were created under domes of transparent plastic, where hardy plants were exposed to filtered Martian air. Some survived. With genetic engineering, more species adapted. Slowly, Mars was nudged toward life, though still within the fragile embrace of technology. The colony's population grew. From a few hundred, it reached thousands, then tens of thousands. Generations turned domes into towns, tunnels into cities. Transportation expanded, pressurized trains linking habitats, fleets of rovers traversing deserts. Mars no longer felt empty. It was a frontier transformed by persistence. But through it all, the fundamental truth remained. Mars was harsh. Oxygen, pressure, and water were still manufactured, still managed with vigilance. Radiation still threatened, gravity still altered bodies. Mars would never simply become Earth. Instead, humanity was becoming Martian, reshaped, redefined, adapted. For the first time in history, humanity had become a multi-planetary species. And with that shift came a new awareness. The universe was open. If Mars could be endured, so too might Europa, Titan, or worlds beyond the solar system. Mars was no end, but a beginning, the first step into the endless frontier. The settlers, now Martians, carried a dual legacy. They were children of Earth, yet architects of something entirely new. They had answered the ancient question not with theory, but with reality. Yes, humans could live on Mars. But more importantly, Mars had proven that humanity was not bound to one world. By the second century of colonization, Mars was no longer thought of as a distant outpost. It had grown into a world of its own, with cities scattered across craters, plains, and lava tubes. Each settlement had its own identity, shaped by geography, history, and the vision of its founders. Together, they formed a fragile yet resilient civilization, proof that humanity could thrive beyond Earth. The early struggles, oxygen, water, pressure, remained constant challenges, but technology had grown more sophisticated. Vast atmospheric processors dotted the land, drawing in carbon dioxide and slowly converting it into oxygen. Their work was still insufficient to make Mars breathable under open skies, but they lessened the dependence on imported systems. Giant underground reservoirs stored melted ice, purified and cycled endlessly. Nuclear fusion, once a dream, had become a cornerstone of energy, giving Martians the ability to power vast habitats without constant fear of shortages. Self-sufficiency had become reality. No longer did colonists wait anxiously for Earth supply ships. Martian industries produced their own machinery, fabrics, medicines, and even spacecraft. Advanced 3D printers using regolith-based composites built habitats stronger than the first fragile domes. Martian farms, a mixture of hydroponics, aeroponics, and genetically modified crops, yielded abundant food. For the first time, Mars could claim independence not only in spirit, but in practice. This transformation changed the relationship with Earth. Where once Earth was the unquestioned authority, it was now a partner, sometimes an uneasy one. Earth's governments and corporations still sought influence, but Martians increasingly resisted. The Martian Council, a governing body formed from elected representatives of the colonies, asserted the right to decide their own policies. Trade agreements were struck, disputes arose, and a new balance of power slowly formed. Mars was no longer a colony. It was a civilization negotiating its place in the human story. Yet the bond between the two worlds was not severed. Earth remained the birthplace, the ancestral home. Cultural exchange flowed both ways. Martians sent back innovations, new technologies for water purification, radiation shielding, sustainable energy. Earth, in turn, offered its art, its traditions, its history. The relationship was complex, filled with both tension and kinship, echoing the age-old story of nations that had once broken away from their motherlands. Meanwhile, life on Mars developed rhythms of its own. A soul, lasting 24 hours and 39 minutes, became the natural unit of time. Martian years, nearly twice as long as Earth's, reshaped calendars. Festivals marked the arrival of resupply fleets, the founding of new settlements, or the discovery of scientific wonders. Children grew up not as immigrants, but as natives, their culture blending Earth's heritage with Martian innovation. To them, the rust-colored deserts were not barren. They were home. Science, as always, remained at the heart of Martian society. Research stations expanded across the planet, probing for signs of ancient or hidden life. Subsurface drills reached deeper, discovering briny pockets of liquid water far beneath the surface. Some scientists believe these reservoirs could harbor extremophiles, tiny organisms adapted to salt and cold. The debate intensified. If life were found, how should Mars be treated? Terraforming advocates pressed forward, but preservationists warned of irreparable harm. The ethical question remained unresolved, shaping laws and guiding exploration. Terraforming itself progressed, but slowly and not without limits. Orbital mirrors grew larger, focusing sunlight onto polar regions to release trapped carbon dioxide. Greenhouse gases were manufactured and released, thickening the atmosphere bit by bit. Certain valleys were enclosed under massive transparent domes, creating controlled microclimates where plants could grow in open soil, streams could flow, and communities could walk without suits. Yet the scale of the planet dwarfed these efforts. Even with centuries of work, Mars remained a world of domes, tunnels, and sealed habitats. Complete transformation was a dream for future millennia, not the present. Still, these partial victories mattered. In the great domes, children ran without helmets, breathing air produced not by imported tanks, but by machines and plants working in harmony. They played beside artificial rivers, their laughter echoing against glass that held back the desert. For them, the line between artificial and natural blurred. What mattered was not whether the river had been carved by Earth's rain or Martian engineers. It was that it flowed. Beyond survival, Martians began to dream of expansion. If Mars could sustain millions, why not other worlds? Colonies on Phobos and Deimos, the tiny moons of Mars, served as stepping stones, hubs for mining and spacecraft assembly. From there, humanity looked outward to the icy moons of Jupiter, the methane seas of Titan, even distant exoplanets waiting beyond the solar system. Mars, once the frontier, had become a launch pad. Yet amid these grand visions, Martians never forgot their origins. They remembered the first settlers, fragile and uncertain, who dared to ask the question, can humans live here? The answer had been written not in words, but in generations of survival, in children born beneath a crimson sky, in cities carved from stone and steel. Humans could live on Mars, and more than that, they could build a future from it. By the time the Martian population reached into the millions, the question of identity had shifted from theory to lived reality. The first generations of Martian-born children had grown into adults, and their children in turn had never known Earth. These descendants of settlers no longer thought of themselves as Earth's colonists. They were Martians, distinct, self-aware, and proud. Their biology marked them as different. Decades of studies confirmed what early scientists had predicted. Martian-born humans developed longer limbs, lighter bone structures, and altered cardiovascular systems. Radiation, though controlled with technology, left subtle genetic imprints, producing adaptations that were not yet fully understood. While Earth-born humans could adapt to Mars through rigorous training and medicine, Martian-born humans found Earth far more difficult. Its heavier gravity strained their hearts and bones. For many, Earth was not a home they could ever live in permanently. This divergence shaped culture. Martians spoke of Earth with reverence, but also with distance. It was the first world, the cradle of humanity, but not their world. Their art reflected this duality. Paintings often showed Earth hanging as a blue star over Martian landscapes. Music carried tones of longing, combining rhythms inspired by Earth traditions with new harmonies born of life in confined spaces and alien horizons. Literature spoke of transformation, of leaving behind old identities and forging new ones. Education reinforced this perspective. Children learned Earth history alongside Martian history, but emphasis was placed on the struggles and triumphs of the settlers. The narrative of survival, adaptation, and perseverance became the founding mythology of Martian society. Where Earth civilizations had myths of gods and creation, Mars had stories of engineers, farmers, scientists, and the first child born under an alien sky. These figures became cultural heroes, their names etched into the memory of every generation. Governance matured into full independence. The Martian Council transformed into the Martian Assembly, a democratic body representing cities and settlements across the planet. Laws were crafted not as extensions of Earth's treaties, but as original Martian frameworks. Core values emerged: sustainability, cooperation, resilience. Unlike Earth nations, often divided by borders and competition, Martians understood their survival depended on unity. Waste, corruption, and neglect were not tolerated, for they threatened the fragile balance of life itself. Earth, however, did not always accept this independence easily. Corporations that had invested in early colonization demanded returns. Governments insisted on shared ownership of Martian resources. But Martians, now self-sufficient, resisted. Negotiations grew tense. Trade was necessary. Earth still offered cultural treasures, advanced research, and genetic diversity. But the balance of power was shifting. For the first time, Mars could say no. This autonomy inspired a new phase of expansion. Martians looked beyond their planet, using Phobos and Deimos as construction yards for massive spacecraft. They developed propulsion systems capable of carrying them farther into the solar system, toward the asteroid belt, where resources lay in abundance. Some spoke of settlements on Europa, Ganymede, and Titan. Others dreamed of pushing even further, of reaching exoplanets orbiting distant stars. Mars became not just a second home of humanity, but its frontier capital. From the surface of a once barren planet, humanity launched its next great age of exploration. Earth provided history, culture, and memory. Mars provided ambition, courage, and reach. Yet even amid this expansion, Mars itself remained central to Martian life. Terraforming had advanced only partially. Certain valleys and enclosed regions now supported outdoor life, with breathable air and liquid water. Small forests grew under protective domes. Rivers were engineered to flow in controlled basins, and grasslands stretched where once only dust lay. But most of Mars remained hostile, a reminder of the challenges still ahead. The dream of a fully Earth-like Mars lay in the far future, perhaps centuries or millennia away. For Martians, however, this was not failure but identity. They no longer sought to make Mars into Earth. Instead, they accepted it as Mars, a world different, harsher, yet theirs. They had adapted to domes and tunnels, to recycled air and artificial sunlight. They had built beauty not by replicating Earth, but by embracing Mars. The red planet had become woven into their lives, their culture, their very biology. The Martian ethos was simple: to endure, to innovate, to expand. From fragile beginnings, humanity had proven it could take root on another world. The settlers' question, can humans live on Mars, was no longer debated. The answer surrounded them in cities carved from stone, in children who had never seen Earth, in spacecraft leaving Mars for distant worlds. Mars had done more than host humanity. It had transformed humanity. It had shown that survival was possible, that adaptation was inevitable, and that the stars were within reach. And so Mars stood not as Earth's shadow, but as its partner, an equal world born of struggle, defined by resilience, and destined to lead humanity ever further into the cosmos. With Mars firmly established as a cradle of its own civilization, attention inevitably turned outward. The solar system, once a distant and hostile void, had begun to look like a field of opportunities. Mars, with its proximity to the asteroid belt and its industrial independence, was perfectly positioned to lead humanity's next great leap. The first targets were the asteroids. Rich in metals, ice, and rare minerals, they represented both wealth and survival. Earth had long feared shortages of resources critical for technology: platinum, nickel, rare earth elements. But the asteroids offered these in abundance. Martian engineers, free from Earth's gravity well, developed fleets of robotic miners and autonomous ships to capture and process these celestial bodies. Phobos and Deimos, the two moons of Mars, became hubs of activity. Once barren rocks, they were transformed into industrial yards and spaceports. From here, spacecraft launched outward with relative ease. Vast orbital foundries processed asteroid material, smelting metals in the vacuum of space and constructing massive structures that no planet's surface could support. For the first time, industry had moved beyond planets entirely. The Martians saw this expansion not only as economic necessity, but as destiny. They had been shaped by scarcity. They understood that survival required reaching outward. Unlike Earth, still burdened by political rivalries and environmental limits, Mars carried a unifying ethos. Exploration was not optional. It was essential. From the belt, missions reached further. Europa, with its hidden ocean beneath an icy shell, drew particular fascination. Instruments detected chemical plumes venting into space, rich with organic compounds. The possibility of alien life, existing independently of Earth's biosphere, ignited scientific passion. Martian researchers spearheaded cautious missions, subsurface probes, sterile landers, orbiting laboratories. Every discovery raised profound questions. Was life a cosmic inevitability? Was humanity alone, or merely one expression among many? Titan, Saturn's largest moon, also called to them. Its thick atmosphere and seas of liquid methane presented both obstacles and opportunities. Martian explorers, already accustomed to alien skies and manufactured ecosystems, saw Titan as another step on a continuum. Dome settlements floated on methane lakes, while fusion reactors provided warmth and light. Where Earth-born humans hesitated at such alien extremes, Martians adapted readily. Survival on Mars had trained them for the impossible. As colonies spread across moons and asteroids, Mars remained the cultural heart of expansion. Earth provided numbers, but Mars provided vision. Martian-born humans, already distinct in biology and spirit, became the natural leaders of this interplanetary frontier. They were seen as the children of adaptation, proof that humanity could reinvent itself. Still, challenges mounted. Distance stretched supply chains thin, and communication delays grew longer as missions ventured outward. Isolation became more intense than ever, requiring new psychological resilience. Entire generations began living in rotating habitats orbiting Jupiter or Saturn, their children never setting foot on either Earth or Mars. A new branch of humanity emerged, not Martian or Terran, but interplanetary. This raised a new philosophical question. What did it mean to be human when humanity now stretched across so many worlds under so many conditions? Some argue that adaptation would eventually fragment the species into different forms. Earth humans, Mars humans, Belt humans, each distinct. Others believed technology and genetic engineering would preserve unity. But one truth was undeniable. The human story had outgrown a single planet. Mars itself, though changed, remained a world of paradox. Great domes housed forests and rivers. Enclosed valleys nurtured farmland, but the majority of the planet remained unbreathable, frozen, and silent. Terraforming continued, but it was clear that Mars would never be a second Earth. It was something else entirely, a permanent reminder that life could flourish even where nature had never intended it. And from Mars' red deserts, humanity had launched into the wider solar system. Where once the night sky had been a source of longing, it was now a map of future homes. The settlers' ancient question, can humans live on Mars, had given way to a far grander one. Can humanity live anywhere? The early answers, carved in domes, tunnels, and distant colonies, suggested yes. Humanity had taken its first true steps toward becoming a species of the stars. As humanity spread across the solar system, unity became increasingly fragile. Distance, once only a psychological challenge, grew into a political and cultural divide. Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies each developed their own priorities, their own identities, and their own visions of the future. Earth remained the most populous and resource-rich. Billions still lived on the cradle of humanity, surrounded by oceans, mountains, and forests that no other world could replicate. Earth's governments often saw themselves as the rightful leaders of humanity, guardians of its heritage. They believed colonies existed because of Earth's technology, funding, and sacrifices, and thus should remain under Earth's influence. Earth emphasized stability, laws, and continuity. Mars, by contrast, had become the symbol of independence. Forged in scarcity, Martian culture valued resilience, innovation, and unity. Martians believed their society had been shaped by struggle in ways Earth could no longer understand. Where Earth sought to preserve traditions, Mars sought to build anew. They spoke of themselves not as Earth's children, but as humanity's next stage, adapted, redefined, and destined to lead. The outer colonies, scattered among asteroids, moons, and orbital stations, had yet another perspective. For them, survival meant constant movement, trade, and improvisation. They lacked the permanence of Earth or Mars, but they thrived on flexibility. Their culture was a patchwork of influences, borrowing from both worlds but loyal to neither. They began calling themselves the Belt, not as a location, but as an identity, nomadic, pragmatic, and fiercely independent. Biology added another layer of complexity. Differences in gravity, radiation, and adaptation were no longer minor. Earth-born humans remained strong, suited for their heavy gravity and rich biosphere. Martian-born humans, taller and lighter, had difficulty returning to Earth, often requiring exoskeletal assistance. Belt-born humans, raised in microgravity habitats, were even more distinct, long-limbed, with delicate frames and unique circulatory adaptations. At first, these differences were subtle, but as generations passed, they deepened. Genetic engineering, once controversial, became common. Each colony tailored its people to its environment. Radiation resistance for Martians, bone density therapies for belt settlers, atmospheric tolerance for Titan colonists. Humanity was no longer a single biological pattern, but a branching tree of variations. This diversity raised profound questions. Were all these groups still the same species? Could they intermarry freely, or were genetic barriers beginning to rise? Philosophers, biologists, and leaders debated fiercely. Some saw this divergence as strength, a proof of humanity's adaptability. Others feared it signaled fragmentation, the slow drifting apart of what it meant to be human. Politics reflected these tensions. Trade disputes flared between Earth and Mars, with each accusing the other of exploitation. The Belt demanded recognition as equal partners, not middlemen. Conferences were held in orbit around Jupiter, in neutral stations where representatives from every world gathered. Their treaties were negotiated, fragile and temporary. Trust was thin, for each faction carried both pride and grievance. Cultural differences compounded the divide. Earth citizens looked at Martians as austere, shaped by hardship but arrogant in their sense of destiny. Martians saw Earth as decadent, clinging to the past and unfit for the challenges of space. The Belt saw both Earth and Mars as heavy-handed, trying to control a people who had chosen freedom among the rocks. Even language began to drift, dialects shaped by distance and environment, words borrowed from technical jargon becoming everyday speech. And yet, despite divisions, a deeper thread of unity persisted. All groups still called themselves human. They still shared ancestry, history, and the dream of reaching further. The stars, once unreachable, remained the ultimate horizon, and none of the worlds could pursue them alone. Ships required trade. Science required collaboration. Survival required cooperation. The story of humanity had become one of divergence and convergence, of branching identities held together by fragile but enduring ties. Earth, Mars, and the Belt were no longer simply locations. They were civilizations. And at the heart of this transformation lay the same truth that had begun on Mars centuries earlier. Humanity was no longer bound to one planet, nor even to one definition of itself. It was becoming something larger, more varied, more complex, a species spread across worlds, reshaping itself as it reshaped the cosmos. The question whispered in the halls of Martian cities, Earth's universities, and belt stations alike was no longer, can humans live on Mars? That had been answered long ago. The new question was far more daunting. Can humanity, divided among so many worlds, still remain one? Centuries after the first settlers set foot on Mars, humanity had become a constellation of civilizations. Earth, with its oceans and skies, remained the ancient cradle. Mars, red and austere, stood as the second home, a world shaped by resilience and struggle. The belt stretched outward, a network of stations and habitats clinging to rocks and ice. And beyond them, scattered lights of human presence, dotted moons, gas giants, and distant outposts. The human species, once unified by its singular home, now carried many forms. Earth humans, strong and dense-boned, remained closest to the ancestral shape. Martian humans, tall and lean, bore the marks of thin air and weak gravity. Belt humans, elongated and adapted to microgravity, seemed almost like another species altogether. Titan humans breathed engineered air, and Europa humans carried genetic enhancements to resist radiation. Diversity had become the new norm. At times, this divergence threatened to fracture humanity beyond recognition. Debates raged. Were all these variants still human, or had evolution branched too far? Geneticists argued that DNA still tied them together. Philosophers countered that humanity was not merely a biological pattern, but a shared story. Leaders worried about conflict, for history showed that difference often bred division. Yet alongside tension came connection. Technologies of communication bridged vast distances, even across hours of delay. Shared councils were formed, assemblies that represented Earth, Mars, and the colonies. Trade bound them together. Minerals from the belt, food from Mars, culture from Earth. And above all, exploration united them. The stars, eternal and endless, remained a goal none could reach alone. Mars played a unique role in this era. It was not the most powerful world, nor the richest, but it was the bridge. Earth still held population and memory. The belt held resources, but Mars had identity. Martians, descendants of the first great experiment in living beyond Earth, understood adaptation better than anyone. They became mediators, leaders, and visionaries. When disputes flared, Martian voices often brought compromise. When dreams of expansion arose, Martian engineers and scientists led the charge. And expansion did not stop. Beyond the outer planets, humanity sent probes and then ships to the Kuiper Belt. Generations later, the first great vessels, city-sized, built from asteroid metal and powered by fusion, departed for other stars. These ships carried the seeds of humanity's next chapter, self-sustaining ecosystems, communities prepared for journeys lasting centuries. They were not Earth's ships, nor Mars' ships, but humanity's ships carrying a legacy that now belonged to all its branches. In this far future, the original question, can humans live on Mars, seemed almost quaint. It had been asked with wonder, fear, and doubt. It had been answered with blood, sweat, and generations of persistence. The answer was not simply yes. It was that humanity could live not only on Mars, but on worlds unimaginably different, in skies alien and harsh, in habitats never foreseen. Mars had been the first test, the proving ground. It had taught humanity that survival was possible beyond Earth, that fragility could be overcome, that identity could expand. Mars had transformed humanity not by making itself Earth-like, but by forcing humans to adapt, to grow, to change. And so, as ships departed Mars for the stars, Martians looked up at the sky, at constellations seen through thin red air, at Earth glowing blue in the distance, at stars waiting like open doors. They remembered their ancestors who had stepped into the dust of Jezero crater and asked if life was possible here. The story had grown larger than Mars, larger than Earth. Humanity was no longer bound to one planet or even one definition. It was a species of many worlds, many forms, many futures. And in the silence of the cosmos, the legacy of Mars endured, proof that the human spirit, fragile yet unyielding, could take root anywhere.